You know that moment when someone treats you like you're invisible, only to discover you hold all the cards? Well, my name is Madeline Wood, and what happened at my sister-in-law's wedding will blow your mind. Picture this. I'm being pushed out of every single family photo, treated like an outsider at what should have been a celebration of family unity. But here's the twist they never saw coming. I owned the entire venue. And when they realized that little detail, everything changed in the most dramatic way possible. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole mess started 6 months ago when my husband Derek's younger sister Cassandra announced her engagement to her college boyfriend Ryan Mitchell. Now, I should mention that Derek and I had been married for 3 years at this point, but his family, particularly his mother Patricia and sister Cassandra, had never fully accepted me. It wasn't anything they said directly, but rather 1,000 little cuts. The way conversations would pause when I entered a room, how I was somehow always forgotten when making dinner reservations, the subtle eye rolls when I offered suggestions for family gatherings. Derek, bless his heart, either didn't notice or chose not to see it. He'd grown up in this tight-knit family bubble where his mother Patricia ruled with an iron fist disguised as Southern charm, and Cassandra was the golden child who could do no wrong. As the eldest son, Derek had always been the responsible one, the one who fixed everyone else's problems, and somehow that extended to overlooking how his family treated his wife. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and explain how I ended up owning Willowbrook Estate in the first place. 2 years before Derek and I even met, I'd been working as an event coordinator for various venues around Nashville. I had a good eye for what made spaces special and an even better head for business. When Willowbrook Estate, this gorgeous antebellum mansion with sprawling gardens about 30 minutes outside the city, went up for auction due to the previous owner's financial troubles, I saw an opportunity. The place was stunning but needed serious work. Most people saw the peeling paint, overgrown gardens, and outdated electrical systems. I saw potential. Using every penny of my savings, plus a loan that honestly terrified me, I bought Willowbrook Estate for a fraction of what it should have been worth. Then I spent the next year and a half pouring my heart, soul, and every spare moment into renovating it. I personally supervised the restoration of the original hardwood floors, the installation of modern lighting that complemented the historic architecture, and the landscaping that turned wild overgrowth into magazine-worthy gardens. By the time I met Derek at a friend's barbecue, Willowbrook Estate was becoming one of the most sought-after wedding venues in Middle Tennessee. Derek knew about my business, of course, but he'd never actually visited the venue. We usually met at his apartment or mine, and our relationship moved pretty quickly from casual dating to serious commitment. His family knew I worked in events, but I don't think they fully grasped what that meant. To Patricia, I was just some girl who planned parties. To Cassandra, I was the woman who'd stolen her big brother's attention. Neither of them bothered to ask for details about my actual work. When Cassandra got engaged, the family immediately went into wedding planning overdrive. Patricia appointed herself as the unofficial wedding coordinator, and Cassandra was more than happy to let her mother take control. They spent weeks visiting venues around Nashville, dismissing places as either too expensive, too small, too modern, or not prestigious enough for a Montgomery family wedding. Yes, that's Derek's last name, Derek Montgomery, and you'd think I'd have taken it when we married, but I'd already built my business reputation as Madeline Wood, so I kept my maiden name professionally. The venue hunting went on for months. Every Sunday dinner became a rehashing of the latest disappointment. The country club was booked solid for the next 18 months. The historic mansion downtown was beautiful but had terrible parking. The vineyard was lovely but too far from the city for elderly relatives. The boutique hotel was perfect but cost more than Cassandra's entire college education. Meanwhile, I sat at these dinners, listening to their complaints about venues that were either inferior to mine or ridiculously overpriced compared to what I charged. Several times I opened my mouth to mention Willowbrook Estate, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was Patricia's dismissive tone when discussing those tacky new places that don't understand real elegance.
Maybe it was Cassandra's comment about wanting somewhere with real history and class, not some wannabe venue run by people who don't understand Southern traditions. So I kept quiet and watched them struggle. Finally, about 4 months before the wedding date, desperation set in. Cassandra was having daily meltdowns about not having a venue. Patricia was making increasingly frantic calls to every venue within a 100-mile radius. Derek was getting stressed watching his family spiral, and frankly, the constant drama at Sunday dinners was exhausting. That's when Derek finally asked me directly if Willowbrook Estate might work for Cassandra's wedding. "I know you usually book pretty far in advance," he said one evening as we cleaned up after another tense family dinner, "but maybe you could take a look at your calendar, just as a favor." I told him I'd check, but honestly, I'd been holding that date open for months, watching this whole venue crisis unfold. Not out of spite, exactly, but more out of curiosity about how far they'd push before asking for help.
When I told Derek that yes, I happened to have that Saturday available, he was so relieved he actually picked me up and spun me around the kitchen. Then came the awkward part, explaining to his family that his wife could solve their venue problem. The conversation happened the following Sunday at Patricia's house. Derek cleared his throat during dessert and announced that he had good news about the venue situation. "Madeline checked her calendar," he said, smiling at me encouragingly. "Willowbrook Estate is available for Cassandra's wedding date." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia set down her coffee cup with the kind of precision that suggested she was working very hard to control her reaction. Cassandra looked confused. "What's Willowbrook Estate?" Cassandra asked. "It's the venue Madeline owns and operates," Derek explained. "You know, her business." You could practically see the wheels turning in Patricia's head. Her daughter-in-law, the woman she'd spent 3 years treating as an insignificant addition to the family, owned a wedding venue? Not just any venue, but potentially the solution to their increasingly desperate search. "Oh," Patricia said carefully. "I see. And what sort of establishment is it exactly?" I pulled out my phone and showed them some photos. The expression on Cassandra's face shifted from confusion to interest to genuine excitement as she scrolled through images of the grand ballroom with its crystal chandeliers, the wraparound veranda perfect for cocktail hour, and the garden ceremony space framed by centuries-old oak trees. "This is gorgeous," Cassandra breathed. "Derek, why didn't you tell us Madeline owned something like this?" Derek looked genuinely puzzled. "I thought you knew. I mean, I've mentioned her work plenty of times." But of course, they hadn't been listening. When someone is invisible to you, you don't pay attention to the details of their life. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Patricia recovered quickly, as she always did when circumstances shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Well, this is certainly convenient," she said, managing to make convenience sound like a character flaw. "I suppose we should schedule a proper tour." That tour happened the following weekend, and I have to admit, I enjoyed watching their faces as they walked through Willowbrook Estate. Cassandra was practically bouncing with excitement, pointing out details to Ryan and already envisioning her wedding day. Even Patricia, despite her best efforts to remain coolly appraising, couldn't hide her approval of the venue's elegance and historic charm. By the end of the tour, it was settled. Cassandra would have her wedding at Willowbrook Estate. But here's where things get interesting, and where I probably should have paid more attention to the subtle shift in family dynamics that the tour created. Once Cassandra booked Willowbrook Estate, you'd think the family dynamics might improve. After all, I was literally saving their wedding. But instead of gratitude, what I got was something much more complicated and frankly insulting. Patricia immediately appointed herself as the liaison between the family and the venue, as if I wasn't her daughter-in-law but simply a vendor to be managed. She started calling me during business hours with demands disguised as requests, speaking to me in the same tone she probably used with caterers and florists. "Madeline, dear," she'd say, "we'll need the ceremony moved 30 minutes earlier to accommodate Uncle Harold's medication schedule." Madeline, we've decided the cocktail hour should be extended by an hour, so you'll need to adjust your timeline accordingly. Madeline, Cassandra has her heart set on bringing in her own decorator to completely redesign the ballroom. I trust that won't be a problem. Each conversation followed the same pattern. She'd present changes as if they were minor favors, completely ignoring the fact that most of them required significant logistical adjustments, additional staff, or violated policies I'd established for very good reasons. The decorator situation was particularly galling. Cassandra had found this woman, Vivian Ashford, who specialized in what she called elevated Southern elegance. Vivian wanted to bring in entirely different linens, lighting, centerpieces, and even furniture to transform my carefully designed space into her vision. When I explained that outside decorators needed to work within certain parameters to protect the venue's historic features and maintain insurance compliance, Patricia acted like I was being deliberately difficult. "It's just for one day, Madeline," she said, with that smile that never reached her eyes. "Surely you can be flexible for your family." But here's what really got to me. They weren't treating this like a family favor. They were paying full price from everything, which Patricia made sure to mention whenever I hesitated about their requests. "We're not asking for charity," she'd say. "We're paying customers, and we expect professional service." So I was simultaneously expected to give them special treatment because we were family, while also being reminded that I was essentially their hired help. It was maddening. Derek tried to stay out of the wedding planning entirely, which I understood, but also frustrating. Whenever I'd bring up the latest unreasonable request from his mother or sister, he'd just shrug and say, "You know how they get about parties. Just do whatever keeps the peace." But keeping the peace was exhausting me. Every phone call from Patricia felt like a test I was expected to fail. Every meeting with Cassandra involved her second-guessing decisions I'd made based on 15 years of event experience. They treated my expertise like opinion, my policies like suggestions, and my business like their personal playground. The breaking point came about 6 weeks before the wedding, during what Patricia called a family planning meeting. She'd organized this gathering at her house, ostensibly to finalize all the wedding details. When I arrived, I found Patricia, Cassandra, Derek's Aunt Margaret, and 3 of Cassandra's bridesmaids gathered around Patricia's dining room table with notebooks, fabric samples, and what appeared to be a military-level organizational chart. "Oh, good, you're here," Patricia said without looking up. "We were just discussing the photography timeline." Now, I should mention that coordinating with photographers was always one of the most complex parts of wedding planning. Every photographer had different needs for lighting, positioning, and timing. I'd worked with hundreds of them over the years and had developed systems that kept everything running smoothly. But as Patricia began outlining their photography plan, it became clear they'd made decisions without consulting me at all. They'd hired Marcus Chen, a photographer I'd actually recommended, but they'd created a timeline that was completely unrealistic and ignored several logistical necessities. "We want the ceremony photos taken immediately after the service, when the light is still perfect," Cassandra explained. "Then we'll do all the family photos on the main staircase, followed by the wedding party shots in the garden, and then the couple's portraits by the lake." I pulled out my own notebook and started calculating. "That's going to take at least 90 minutes, I said. "What about your cocktail hour? Your guests will be waiting." "That's why we're serving past appetizers during photos," Patricia said dismissively. "The guests can mingle." For 90 minutes? Without the bride and groom? And you want to use the main staircase, which means blocking access between the ceremony space and the reception area while your guests are trying to move around? Aunt Margaret, who I'd always found more reasonable than Patricia, looked concerned. "That does seem like a long time to leave guests unattended." But Patricia had already moved on. "Now, about the family photos," she said, consulting her list. "We'll need shots of the Montgomery family, the Mitchell family, the grandparents with Cassandra and Ryan, the siblings, the cousins." She went on for several minutes, listing out every possible family combination. I was taking notes, trying to calculate how to fit all of this into their unrealistic timeline, when I realized something that made my stomach drop. She hadn't mentioned me once, not in a single family grouping. What about photos with Derek and me? I asked during a pause in her recitation. Patricia looked genuinely confused. Oh, you'll be working, won't you? Managing the venue? The room went dead silent. Even the bridesmaids stopped their fabric compared to stare. Derek, who'd been half listening while scrolling through his phone, suddenly looked up. Mom, he said carefully, Madeline is family. She needs to be in the family photos. Well, of course, if she has time, Patricia said with a wave of her hand. But realistically, she'll need to be coordinating with the caterers and making sure everything runs smoothly. We can't expect her to abandon her professional responsibilities for photos. I felt heat rising in my face. I have staff to handle operations during the wedding. I always participate in family events at my venue when they're for the actual family. But this is different, Cassandra chimed in. I mean, it's your business. Don't you need to be, working? Here's what was happening, and I could see it crystal clear in that moment. They'd found a way to exclude me that sounded almost reasonable. I wasn't being left out of family photos because they didn't like me. I was being left out because I was the venue owner, and venue owners work during events. It was the perfect excuse wrapped in concern for my professional obligations. Derek was getting visibly uncomfortable. She can step away for photos, Mom. That's how these things work. But Patricia was already shaking her head. I just think it would be awkward having the venue owner in all the family pictures. What will people think when they look at the album years from now? It might seem commercial. Commercial. She actually used that word, as if my presence in my own family's photos would somehow cheapen the memories. Besides, Cassandra added, clearly emboldened by her mother's support, you'll be so busy making sure everything's perfect, you probably wouldn't want to be pulled away for every single family combination. The manipulation was breathtaking. They were framing my exclusion as consideration for my workload and concern for the wedding's success. Any objection I made could be painted as me being selfish, putting my personal desires ahead of my professional responsibilities. Derek was getting visibly uncomfortable. She can step away for photos, Mom. That's how these things work. But Patricia was already shaking her head. I just think it would be awkward having the venue owner in all the family pictures. What will people think when they look at the album years from now? It might seem commercial. Commercial. She actually used that word, as if my presence in my own family's photos would somehow cheapen the memories. Besides, Cassandra added, clearly emboldened by her mother's support, you'll be so busy making sure everything's perfect, you probably wouldn't want to be pulled away for every single family combination. The manipulation was breathtaking. They were framing my exclusion as consideration for my workload and concern for the wedding's success. Any objection I made could be painted as me being selfish, putting my personal desires ahead of my professional responsibilities. Derek was looking back and forth between his family and me, clearly torn. I could see him trying to find a compromise that would satisfy everyone, but there wasn't one. Either I was the family who belonged in family photos, or I was the hired help who needed to stay behind the scenes. That's when I realized something that changed everything. They weren't just excluding me from photos, they were redefining my entire role in the family. I wasn't Derek's wife who happened to own the venue. I was the venue owner who happened to be married to Derek. And in their minds, that distinction mattered enormously. I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly. The conversation continued behind me as I walked out onto Patricia's back porch, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I was thinking about power dynamics and family hierarchies and what it meant that they felt comfortable treating me this way in my own husband's presence. That's when the plan started forming in my head. Not revenge exactly, but a lesson in consequences they'd never forget. The drive home from Patricia's house was tense. Derek kept glancing at me, clearly wanting to address what had just happened, but not sure how to start. Finally, as we pulled into our driveway, he cleared his throat. Look, I'll talk to them about the photo thing. That was out of line. I turned to look at him. Derek, do you honestly think this is just about photos? He sighed, running his hands through his hair. I know my family can be difficult, but they're just stressed about the wedding.
Once it's over, things will go back to normal. Normal? As if the way his family treated me was acceptable baseline behavior that we should all just tolerate? What if I told you I was thinking about pulling out? I said, quietly. What if I said they could find another venue? The look of panic that crossed his face was immediate and genuine. Madeline, you can't. The wedding's in 6 weeks. They'll never find another place. So my feelings don't matter as long as it's convenient for everyone else? Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that honestly surprised me. What do you want me to do? They're my family. I can't change who they are. That's when I realized Derek wasn't going to be the solution to this problem. He wasn't going to stand up to his family in any meaningful way, because deep down, he didn't really see what they were doing as that serious. To him, it was just family drama, the kind of thing you endure and work around rather than confront directly. But I wasn't willing to endure it anymore. And that's when my plan shifted from vague ideas about teaching them a lesson to something much more concrete and satisfying. Over the next few days, I started making subtle changes to the wedding arrangements. Nothing that would ruin Cassandra's day, but everything designed to remind them exactly who held the power in this situation. First, I revised the vendor coordination protocols. Instead of allowing Patricia to communicate directly with the caterer, florist, and other vendors, I implemented a policy requiring all changes to go through me as the venue coordinator. When Patricia called the caterer directly to request menu modifications, she was politely told that they couldn't make changes without approval from Willowbrook Estate Management. I don't understand why you're making this so complicated, Patricia said when she called to complain. We just want to add a signature cocktail. All vendor communications need to be centralized to prevent conflicts and ensure proper coordination. It's standard protocol for events of this scale. She couldn't argue with that because it was perfectly reasonable, but it meant she couldn't no longer bypass me to make changes, which clearly frustrated her.
Next, I addressed the decorator situation. Vivian Ashford had been pushing to install her own lighting system, which would require temporarily removing some of my venue's permanent fixtures. I'd initially agreed under pressure, but now I discovered that our insurance policy had very specific language about temporary electrical modifications that made her plan impossible. I'm so sorry, I told Cassandra during our next planning call. My insurance company reviewed Vivian's lighting proposal and determined it creates liability issues they can't cover. We'll need to work with the existing lighting system. Was this entirely true? Let's just say insurance policies are complex documents that can be interpreted in various ways, and I chose the interpretation that served my purposes. The real masterstroke, though, involved the photography timeline. Remember how Patricia and Cassandra had planned this elaborate 90-minute photo session that completely ignored my recommendations? Well, it turns out that Marcus Chen, the photographer, had never actually agreed to that timeline. When I reached out to confirm details with him directly, he was shocked to learn what they'd planned. 90 minutes of family photos while guests wait, Marcus said during our phone call. That's a disaster waiting to happen. I never agreed to that. Usually we do 30 minutes max, and we work around the reception timeline, not against it. So I worked with Marcus to create a realistic photography schedule that prioritized the celebration over the photo session. 30 minutes for family photos, strategically timed so guests could enjoy cocktails and appetizers while the couple did portraits. Much more reasonable, much better for everyone involved. When I presented this revised timeline to Patricia and Cassandra, the reaction was immediate and predictable. But we need more time for all the family combinations, Cassandra protested. I understand, but this is what the photographer recommends based on his experience. We can certainly take more photos, but they'd need to happen after dinner, when guests are dancing and won't miss the bride and groom. Patricia's voice took on that edge I was becoming very familiar with. Madeline, we hired Marcus specifically because you recommended him. Surely he can accommodate our preferences. He's willing to work with whatever timeline you prefer, I said smoothly, but he wanted to make sure you understood the impact on your guest's experience. I can set up a three-way call if you'd like to discuss it with him directly.
They declined the call, probably because they knew Marcus would tell them exactly what I'd already told them. Their original plan was unrealistic and inconsiderate to their guests. But here's where things got interesting. Instead of accepting the professional guidance, they decided to go around me again. Cassandra called Marcus directly and tried to convince him to stick with their original timeline. When that didn't work, Patricia reached out to him with what she probably thought was a compelling argument about family expectations and once-in-a-lifetime moments. Marcus, being the professional he was, forwarded these conversations to me with a note. Is there some kind of family conflict I should know about? The client seems to be pushing for things that will make the event less enjoyable for everyone. That's when I realized something important. Patricia and Cassandra weren't just trying to exclude me from family photos, they were actively trying to undermine my professional judgment and circumvent my authority at my own venue. They thought they could treat me like an inconvenient obstacle to work around, rather than the person they were paying to ensure their event succeeded. So I made a decision that would change everything. I called a meeting with Derek, Patricia, Cassandra, and Ryan for the following Saturday. I framed it as a final coordination meeting to review all the details and ensure everyone was on the same page. They agreed readily, probably expecting another opportunity to wear me down on their various demands. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Willowbrook Estate. I wanted them to see the venue in full afternoon light, to remember exactly how beautiful and irreplaceable it was. Derek arrived first, looking nervous. He'd been walking on eggshells around me all week, clearly sensing that something had shifted, but not sure what. "Everything okay?" he asked as we waited for his family. "Everything's fine," I said. "We're just going to clarify some expectations." Patricia and Cassandra arrived together, with Ryan trailing behind, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'd grown to feel sorry for Ryan over the months of wedding planning. He was a nice, quiet guy who seemed overwhelmed by the Montgomery family's intensity and was clearly just trying to survive until the wedding was over. We gathered in my office, which I chose specifically because it showcased the awards Willowbrook Estate had won, the magazine features we'd been included in, and the photos from some of our most prestigious events. I wanted them sitting surrounded by evidence of my success and professional reputation. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I wanted to review the final details and address some concerns that have come up during the planning process." I had prepared a presentation, complete with printed handouts detailing every aspect of the wedding timeline, vendor coordination, and venue policies. As I walked them through each element, I watched their faces carefully. Patricia kept checking her watch, clearly thinking this was another vendor meeting she needed to endure. Cassandra was scrolling through her phone, probably looking at last-minute decoration ideas. Derek was paying attention, but looked confused about why this formal presentation was necessary. Then I got to the section that mattered. "Now, regarding the family photography session," I said, consulting my notes, "I've coordinated with Marcus to ensure we have adequate time for all the essential family combinations while respecting your guests' experience." I distributed a detailed photography timeline that listed every family grouping: Montgomery parents with bride and groom, Mitchell parents with bride and groom, grandparents, siblings, extended family. It was comprehensive and well organized. But there was one name missing from every single grouping: mine. The silence in my office stretched for several seconds as everyone studied the photography timeline I just handed out. Derek was the first to notice what was missing. "Wait," he said, looking up from the paper. "Where are the photos with Madeline and me? Where's my wife in any of these groupings?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. Based on our previous discussion, I understood that my presence in family photos would be inappropriate due to my professional obligations as venue owner. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we didn't mean—" "Actually, you were quite clear," I interrupted, pulling out my own notes from that meeting at her house. "You said it would be awkward having the venue owner in family pictures, and that it might seem commercial. Cassandra agreed that I'd be too busy working to participate, so I've arranged the timeline accordingly." Cassandra looked confused, as if she couldn't quite remember the conversation the same way. "But I thought we could work something out." "Oh, we absolutely can," I said pleasantly. But first, I think we need to clarify some fundamental misunderstandings about roles and expectations. I stood up and moved to the wall where I kept framed photos from various weddings I'd hosted. You see, there seems to be some confusion about whether I'm family who happens to own this venue or a vendor who happens to be married to Derek. And that confusion has created some interesting dynamics over the past few months. Ryan was looking increasingly uncomfortable, probably sensing that he was about to witness a family confrontation that had nothing to do with him. Derek was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, part admiration, part concern, part fear. "Madeline," Patricia said carefully, "if there's been a misunderstanding, let me share some specific examples," I continued. "Patricia, in the past 6 weeks, you've contacted me during business hours with 17 separate requests for changes to the original contract. 12 of those requests required additional staff, extended hours, or modifications to venue policies. When I explained the additional costs or logistical challenges, you responded by reminding me that you were paying customers who expected professional service." Patricia's face was turning red. "I was just trying to ensure." "Cassandra," I turned to my sister-in-law, "you attempted to bypass my vendor coordination protocols by contacting the caterer, florist, and photographer directly to make changes without my approval. When they referred you back to me, you complained to Derek that I was being controlling and making everything more complicated than it needed to be." Cassandra opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. "Please, let me finish. You also brought in an outside decorator who wanted to remove original fixtures from a historically registered building, then acted surprised when insurance regulations prevented those modifications. You called those regulations arbitrary rules and suggested I was hiding behind technicalities to avoid accommodating your vision." The room was dead quiet, except for the sound of Patricia's breathing, which was getting noticeably heavier. "Now," I continued, "if I were simply a vendor you'd hired, this behavior would be rude but not particularly unusual. Difficult clients are part of the hospitality business. But I'm not just a vendor. I'm your family member. I'm Derek's wife. And the way you've treated me over these past months has made it very clear that you don't actually see me as family at all." Derek finally found his voice. "Madeline, I think you're overreacting." "Am I?" I turned to face him directly. "Your mother has spoken to me with less respect than she shows the grocery store cashier. Your sister has dismissed my professional expertise as personal opinion and tried to manipulate vendors behind my back. And when it came time for family photos, the ultimate symbol of belonging, they found a way to exclude me that they could frame as consideration for my work responsibilities." I pulled out another sheet of paper. "So, I've made some adjustments to our arrangement that I think will clarify everyone's expectations." This was the moment I'd been building toward, and I have to admit, I was enjoying the suspense on their faces. Given the apparent confusion about my role, I've decided to step back from any family involvement in this wedding. I will be present solely as the venue owner and coordinator. I will not participate in family photos, family dances, or any other family activities. I will remain in professional mode throughout the entire event." Patricia looked relieved, as if this was exactly what she'd wanted all along. "Well, if that's what you prefer—" "I'm not finished," I said. "Since I'll be working in a purely professional capacity, I'll need to implement some additional policies that apply to all my clients." I handed out another set of papers. "First, the day of wedding coordinator fee. Since I'll be actively managing the event rather than participating as a guest, my standard coordination fee applies. That's an additional $1,500. Derek's eyes went wide. "Madeline, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." "Second, the vendor management fee for coordinating outside decorators. Since Vivian Ashford required extensive coordination to work within our guidelines, that's another $800. Cassandra was staring at the paper like she couldn't believe what she was reading. "But we're family." "Are we?" I asked genuinely. "Because for the past 6 months, you've treated me exactly like any other vendor. You've demanded professional service, reminded me that you're paying customers, and excluded me from family activities. So let's make it official." I pulled out the final document, a revised contract addendum. This formalizes the additional fees and clarifies that Madeline Wood of Willowbrook Estate is providing services in a professional capacities only, with no family considerations or accommodations. Patricia was scanning the document, and I could see her calculating the additional costs. This is ridiculous. We're not paying extra fees because you're having some kind of emotional reaction. You're absolutely right, I said. You don't have to pay anything extra. You have two other options. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Option 2. You can find another venue. I'll refund your deposit, and you can book somewhere else for your wedding in 4 weeks.
The color drained from Cassandra's face. Madeline, there's nowhere else available on such short notice. You know that. Option 3, I continued, is to acknowledge that I am, in fact, family, that I deserve to be treated with the same respect you show Derek, the same consideration you show each other. That includes being included in family photos without having to justify my presence or defend my right to participate in my own family celebrations. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Everyone in that room understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't really about wedding planning or photography timelines. This was about power, respect, and what it meant to belong to a family. Derek was the first to speak. Of course you should be in the family photos. I never should have let them. This isn't about what you let them do, I interrupted. This is about what they choose to do and what you choose to do in response. I turned back to Patricia and Cassandra. The choice is yours. You can have a wedding where I'm treated like hired help and charged accordingly, or you can have a wedding where I'm treated like family and included accordingly. But you can't have both. Patricia's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. You're manipulating us, using our wedding to force some kind of confrontation. I'm clarifying terms, I corrected. You've spent months manipulating me by using family relationships when it served you and professional boundaries when it didn't. I'm simply asking you to pick one approach and stick with it. Ryan, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Maybe we should take a break and think about this. But Cassandra was shaking her head. No, this is insane. You can't hold our wedding hostage because your feelings are hurt. That's when I realized they still didn't get it. They thought this was about hurt feelings, about me being overly sensitive or demanding attention. They couldn't see that this was about basic human dignity and respect. Let me be very clear, I said, standing up and moving to the window that overlooked the garden where Cassandra's ceremony would take place. I'm not holding anything hostage. I'm offering you 3 clear choices with transparent consequences. What you choose will tell me everything I need to know about where I stand in this family. I turned back to face them. But whatever you decide, decide quickly, because I need to know whether to prepare vendor contracts or family celebration plans. The ball was entirely in their court now, and judging by the looks on their faces, they were just beginning to understand how completely the power dynamic had shifted. The tension in my office was suffocating. Patricia kept looking between the contract addendum and her daughter, as if trying to calculate which option would cost her the least, financially and socially. Cassandra was staring out the window at her future ceremony space, probably imagining having to call 200 guests to tell them the wedding was canceled. Derek looked like he was witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Ryan broke the silence. Can we have a few minutes to discuss this privately? Of course, I said. Take all the time you need. I'll be in the main house when you're ready. I left them in my office and walked through the venue, checking on some genuine last-minute preparations for a corporate event we had the following week. But honestly, I was also giving myself time to process what had just happened. For months, I'd been swallowing my frustration and trying to keep the peace. Finally, laying everything out in stark terms felt both terrifying and liberating. About 20 minutes later, Derek found me in the kitchen where I was reviewing catering layouts with my assistant manager, Sophie. They want to talk, he said quietly. Sophie, who had worked enough family events to recognize the drama when she saw it, excused herself diplomatically.
Derek and I walked back to the office in silence. When we entered, the family dynamic had clearly shifted. Patricia was sitting stiffly upright, her hands folded in her lap in that way that suggested she was exercising tremendous self-control. Cassandra looked like she'd been crying, though she was trying to hide it. Ryan was studying his hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. "We've discussed it," Patricia began, her voice carefully measured, "and we think there's been a misunderstanding about intentions." Here we go, I thought. The attempt to reframe everything as a communication problem rather than a respect problem. "We never meant to exclude you from family activities. Perhaps our concerns about your work responsibilities were misinterpreted as something more personal." I remained silent, waiting to see where this was heading. Cassandra jumped in. "I really do want you in the family photos, Madeline. I was just worried about disrupting your work, but I see now that I came across wrong." It was a careful non-apology, acknowledging that their behavior had been misinterpreted while not actually admitting they'd done anything wrong. Classic Patricia Montgomery diplomacy. "So we'd like to proceed with option 3, Patricia said. Family photos, family treatment, no additional fees." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I need to understand what family treatment means to you going forward." Patricia looked confused. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean, what changes in how you interact with me? What happens the next time you disagree with the decision I make about the venue? What happens when you want to modify vendor arrangements or adjust timelines?" The question hung in the air because they hadn't actually thought that far ahead. They were focused on getting through the wedding crisis, not on examining the underlying relationship patterns. Derek stepped in. "Mom, I think what Madeline is asking is whether you'll treat her opinions and expertise with the same respect you'd show any other family member." "Of course," Patricia said quickly. "I've always respected Madeline's expertise." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a text message from 3 days earlier. "Patricia, you sent me this message on Wednesday. Madeline, we need to discuss your inflexibility regarding the decorator situation. Surely there's a way to accommodate what we want without hiding behind insurance technicalities." I looked up at her. "Does that sound like respecting my expertise?" Patricia's face flushed. I was frustrated about the situation, not questioning your knowledge. "You accused me of hiding behind technicalities when I explained genuine insurance limitations. You called me inflexible for enforcing policies that protect both the venue and your event. How would you feel if someone spoke to Derek that way about his work?" The comparison hit home because Derek is a project manager for a construction company and Patricia was fiercely protective of his professional reputation. I see your point," Patricia said reluctantly. But Cassandra was getting agitated. "This feels like we're being put on trial for every conversation we've had. Can't we just agree to do better and move forward?" "Cassandra," I said gently, "doing better requires understanding what went wrong in the first place. Otherwise, we'll just repeat the same patterns."
I looked around the room at all of them. Here's what I need to know, you understand? When you bypass my authority by going directly to vendors, you're undermining my professional credibility with people I need to maintain relationships with. When you dismiss my recommendations as inflexibility or technicalities, you're telling me that my 15 years of experience don't matter. When you try to exclude me from family activities while expecting family privileges, you're asking me to accept a diminished role in Derek's life. Derek was nodding, finally seeming to grasp the full scope of what had been happening. I should have seen this sooner. The question now, I continued, is whether this conversation changes anything real or whether you're just telling me what I want to hear to get through the wedding. Ryan, surprisingly, was the one who responded. What would real change look like to you? It was a good question, and I realized I needed to be specific rather than leaving it vague. Real change means that when I explain why something can't be done a certain way, you accept that explanation without questioning my motives. Real change means that when you want to modify arrangements, you come to me first instead of trying to work around me. Real change means that family events include me as family, not as staff, unless I specifically choose to work. I paused, then added, And real change means that Derek supports these boundaries instead of asking me to be flexible every time there's conflict. Derek winced but nodded. You're right, I've been trying to keep everyone happy instead of backing you up. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, less controlled, more genuine. I think I owe you an apology, Madeline, a real one. She took a breath. I've been treating you like an outsider who happened to marry into our family instead of like a family who happens to have a business. And I've been doing it because it's easier to keep you at arm's length than to admit you're not going anywhere. This was more honesty than I'd ever heard from Patricia, and it caught me off guard. When Derek married you, I lost some control over his life, she continued. And when you turned out to own this beautiful venue that saved Cassandra's wedding, I felt even more displaced, like you were solving problems I should have been able to solve. Cassandra was staring at her mother with surprise. Apparently, this level of self-reflection was new for Patricia, too. So I convinced myself that keeping you in a professional role meant I could still be the family matriarch, Patricia said. But that was unfair to you, and it was unfair to Derek. The admission was so unexpected that I felt my anger deflating, not disappearing entirely, but shifting into something more manageable. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. So what happens now? Cassandra asked. Do we tear up the extra fee contracts and start over? I looked at the papers scattered across my desk, then at the faces of Derek's family. They all looked exhausted, like they'd been through an emotional marathon, which honestly they had. We start over, I said, but with clear boundaries and better communication. I gathered up the contract addendums and put them in my desk drawer. No additional fees, family photos that include everyone who belongs in them, and going forward, we treat each other like the family we actually are, not the family we're afraid we might become. Derek reached over and squeezed my hand. I promise I'll do better at supporting you when these situations come up. And I promise I'll ask questions instead of making assumptions, Patricia added. Cassandra nodded, and I'll trust your expertise instead of questioning every recommendation. It felt like a genuine resolution, but I knew the real test would come over time. Words were easy, changed behavior was much harder. But for now, we had a wedding to finish planning, and for the first time in months, it felt like we might actually enjoy it. The morning of Cassandra's wedding dawned crisp and clear with that perfect October light that makes everything look like it belongs in a magazine. I arrived at Willowbrook Estate at 6 a.m., 3 hours before the vendors were scheduled to arrive, just to walk through the space and make sure everything was exactly as it should be. There's something magical about a venue in the early morning before an event. The gardens were still touched with dew, the ballroom was pristine and waiting, and the ceremony space looked like something out of a fairy tale. For all the drama of the past months, I felt genuinely excited about creating a beautiful day for Cassandra and Ryan. Sophie met me in the kitchen with coffee and the final timeline. Florist arrives at 9, caterer at 10, photographer at 11 for detail shots, she said, consulting her tablet. Bridal party arrives at noon for hair and makeup. And the decorator, I asked. Vivienne will be here at 8:30 with her modified design, Sophie said with a slight smile, the one that works within our guidelines. After our family meeting the previous week, Vivienne and I had actually had a productive conversation about creating her vision while respecting the venue's historic integrity. It turned out that when she wasn't being pressured to completely transform the space, she had some genuinely beautiful ideas that enhanced rather than replaced the existing aesthetic. Derek arrived around 7:30, looking nervous in the way that grooms always do, like he's not quite sure what he's supposed to be doing but wants to be helpful. How can I help? He asked, kissing me on the cheek. Just stay out of the way and let the professionals work, I said with a grin. But actually, could you check that all the guest bathroom supplies are stocked? Sophie has the checklist. It felt good to have Derek there as my husband rather than as a family mediator. The past week had been different between us, more honest, more direct. He'd started noticing things he'd overlooked before, like when his Aunt Margaret made subtle digs about my event planning hobby, or when his cousin Brad assumed I was the hired coordinator rather than family. The vendors began arriving on schedule, and I slipped into my professional mode. This was always my favorite part, watching empty spaces transform into someone's dream celebration. Vivian's team worked efficiently to enhance the ballroom's natural elegance with cascading white flowers and subtle gold accents that complemented the venue's historic fixtures.
The caterer set up seamlessly in the kitchen, filling the air with the scent of herbs and fresh bread. Marcus Chen arrived with his photography equipment, and I was pleased to see him setting up for the detail shots we'd planned. After all the timeline drama, he'd actually become an ally, appreciating that I prioritized realistic schedules over unrealistic demands. "The light in here is incredible," he said, adjusting his camera settings in the bridal suite. "This is going to be stunning." Around 11:30, Patricia arrived, with her hair already done, looking elegant in a navy blue mother-of-the-bride dress. I braced myself for potential issues, but she surprised me. "Madeline, the space looks absolutely beautiful," she said genuinely. "Vivienne's work complements your venue perfectly." "Thank you," I said. "I think Cassandra's going to be thrilled."
Patricia hesitated for a moment, then said, "I wanted to apologize again for how I handled the planning process. Seeing everything come together today, I realize how much expertise goes into making this look effortless." It was another step in the right direction, and I appreciated that she was making the effort in front of other people rather than just in private. Cassandra arrived with her bridesmaids at noon, practically glowing with excitement. The drama of the past weeks seemed to have evaporated, replaced by pure bridal joy. "Oh my God, Madeline, this is perfect," she squealed, spinning around in the bridal suite. "It's exactly what I dreamed of." The transformation in Cassandra was remarkable. Without the stress of venue problems and family conflict, she was back to being the sweet, enthusiastic person I'd first met. It reminded me why I'd wanted to help her have a perfect wedding day in the first place. As the afternoon progressed, everything clicked into place with the smooth precision that comes from proper planning and professional execution. The ceremony space filled with guests, the musicians took their positions, and the golden hour light began filtering through the oak trees exactly as I'd predicted. But the real test came during the photography session. After the ceremony, as guests moved to the cocktail area, Marcus gathered the family for photos. This was the moment that had started our entire conflict, the question of whether I belonged in family pictures or should remain behind the scenes. "All right, let's start with the Montgomery family," Marcus called out. Patricia, Derek, Cassandra, Derek's brother Michael, and Aunt Margaret gathered around the bride and groom. Then Patricia did something that caught me completely off guard. "Madeline, come on," she called out. "You're family." It wasn't grudging or reluctant. It was natural, like she'd never considered any other possibility. I joined the group, and Derek put his arm around me, pulling me close. "Perfect," Marcus said, snapping away. "Beautiful family." We moved through all the family combinations: grandparents, siblings, extended family. In every single grouping where Derek appeared, I was included without question, without hesitation, without any reference to my work responsibilities. When we got to photos of just Derek and me with the bride and groom, Cassandra actually suggested additional poses. "Can we get one with just the four of us by the fountain?" she asked. "I want a picture of my new sister-in-law in my wedding album." Sister-in-law, not venue owner, not event coordinator, sister-in-law. The cocktail hour flowed seamlessly into dinner, with guests raving about both the food and the setting. I moved through the evening managing logistics when necessary, but spending most of my time actually celebrating with family. Sophie and my other staff handled the operational details, leaving me free to enjoy the party. During the father-daughter dance, Derek found me at our family table. "Having fun?" he asked. "Actually, yes," I said, surprising myself. "It's been wonderful." "Good," he said, extending his hand, "because they're about to play our song." As we danced, I looked around at the celebration we'd all created together. Patricia was laughing with her sister, completely relaxed for the first time in months. Cassandra was radiant, clearly having the perfect wedding she'd dreamed of. Ryan looked relieved that all the family drama was behind them. But the moment that really solidified the change came near the end of the evening. As the last dance was winding down, Patricia approached me with a glass of champagne. "I have something for you," she said, pulling a small wrapped box from her purse. Inside was a beautiful silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a house. "It belonged to Derek's grandmother," Patricia said. "She always said it should go to the woman who made Derek truly happy and who built a real home with him." I felt tears starting to form. "Patricia, I can't accept this. It's too much."
Yes, you can, she said firmly, because you're not just Derek's wife anymore. You're my daughter-in-law, and daughters-in-law get family heirlooms. The bracelet was beautiful, but the gesture meant everything. It was Patricia's way of saying that I truly belonged, that my place in the family wasn't conditional or provisional. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Cassandra found me overseeing the final cleanup. Madeline, she said, still in her wedding dress but with bare feet and slightly smudged makeup, thank you for everything. Not just the venue, but for fighting for your place in our family. I didn't realize how badly we were treating you, and I'm sorry it took almost losing you for us to see it. Thank you for saying that, I said, hugging her carefully around her dress. And congratulations, you looked absolutely beautiful today.
I felt beautiful, she said, and I felt like I was really becoming part of a family, not just marrying into one. As Derek and I drove home that night, I reflected on how dramatically things had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been an outsider, barely tolerated by his family. Tonight, I was wearing his grandmother's bracelet and had a phone full of pictures that proved I belonged in every family moment. So, Derek said as we pulled into our driveway, think you'll ever let them book the venue again? I laughed. Ask me in a few years. But honestly, today was perfect. They treated me like family, I got to use my professional skills to create something beautiful, and everybody got what they wanted. Including you? He asked. Especially me, I said. I got my family back. And as we walked into our house together, I realized that sometimes the best way to claim your place in a family isn't to quietly endure disrespect, but to stand up and demand the treatment you deserve. Because families that are worth belonging to will rise to meet that challenge, and families that won't, well, maybe they're not worth belonging to in the first place. The wedding was beautiful, but the real victory was much bigger than one perfect day. It was knowing that I'd never have to choose between my professional success and my family relationships again, because now they finally understood that both could coexist with mutual respect and genuine love. 6 months after Cassandra's wedding, I was in my office at Willowbrook Estate reviewing contracts for the upcoming spring season when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia's name, and I'll admit, my stomach still did a little flip when I saw it. Old habits die hard. Madeline, dear, do you have a few minutes to chat? Patricia's voice was warm, but I could detect something underneath it. Excitement, maybe nervousness. Of course, what's going on? Well, Margaret's youngest daughter, Emma, just got engaged, and she's absolutely in love with Willowbrook Estate after seeing Cassandra's wedding photos. She's hoping you might have availability for next fall. I pulled up my calendar, genuinely pleased. Emma was Derek's cousin, a sweet girl who just finished her residency in pediatrics. I'd be happy to meet with her. What date are they thinking? October 14th, Patricia said. But Madeline, there's something else. Margaret specifically asked if you'd be willing to help with the overall planning, not just provide the venue. She was so impressed with how everything came together for Cassandra. This was interesting. 6 months ago, Derek's extended family had barely acknowledged my existence. Now, they were actively seeking out my professional services. I do offer full event planning for select clients, I said carefully. What kind of vision does Emma have in mind? Something elegant but relaxed, she said. She loved how Cassandra's wedding felt both sophisticated and welcoming, and she specifically mentioned wanting that Madeline touch, whatever magic you worked to make everything so seamless. After we finished the call and I'd scheduled a meeting with Emma and her fiancé, I sat back in my chair thinking about how much had changed. The shift in family dynamics hadn't just been about one wedding. It had fundamentally altered how Derek's entire extended family viewed me. The transformation had started small. At Derek's birthday dinner 2 months after the wedding, Aunt Margaret had asked my opinion about a restaurant recommendation for her anniversary. Uncle Frank had wanted advice about planning his retirement party. Cousin Brad had actually apologized for assuming I was hired help at the wedding, admitting he'd been embarrassed when Derek corrected him. But the real breakthrough had come at Christmas. Every year, the Montgomery family held their Christmas celebration at Patricia's house, an elaborate affair with multiple courses, assigned seating, and enough family traditions to fill a handbook.
I'd always felt like I was performing in a play where everyone else knew their lines but me. This past Christmas was different from the moment we walked through the door. Patricia hugged me genuinely, not the polite air kiss she'd given me in previous years. Cassandra immediately pulled me into the kitchen to show me her wedding album, which prominently featured the family photos we'd fought so hard to include. "Look how perfect these turned out," she said, pointing to a picture of all of us laughing during the photography session. "I'm so glad you're in every single one." But the moment that really showed me how things had changed came during gift exchange. Patricia had always given me generic gifts, candles, bath sets, the kind of things you buy for acquaintances. This year, she handed me a carefully wrapped package with a nervous smile. Inside was a leather-bound book titled The History of Willowpuck Estate, along with a handwritten note. "I thought you should know the complete story of the place you've brought back to life. The previous owners would be proud of what you've accomplished." She'd spent weeks researching the estate's history, tracking down old photographs and documents, even interviewing descendants of the original family. It was thoughtful, personal, and showed a level of attention to my interests that she'd never demonstrated before. "Patricia, this is incredible," I'd said. "How did you find all this?" "I asked Sophie for a tour of the estate a few months ago," she admitted. "I realized I'd never actually taken the time to understand what you'd built there. When I saw how much care you'd put into preserving the original character while making it functional for modern events, I wanted to learn more about what came before." Derek had looked at me with raised eyebrows, clearly surprised that his mother had taken such initiative. But I understood what it represented. Patricia's way of acknowledging that my work was valuable, that my success mattered to the family. The changes weren't just about me either. Derek had become more assertive about supporting me in family situations, but he'd also become more confident in general. Our marriage felt stronger because we were finally on the same team, instead of him constantly trying to mediate between his family and me. The most dramatic change, though, was in how my business had grown. Word of mouth from satisfied clients is always the best marketing, but having Derek's family, genuinely enthusiastic about referring people to Willowbrick Estate, had opened doors I'd never expected. Patricia had recommended us to 3 different families in her social circle. Cassandra had posted wedding photos on social media with glowing captions about the venue and my coordination services. Even Derek's conservative Uncle Frank had surprised me by referring his business partner's daughter for her engagement party. "You know," Derek said one evening as we reviewed my booking calendar, "I think standing up to my family might have been the best business decision you ever made." He was joking, but there was truth to it. Demanding respect had forced his family to actually see what I'd accomplished, and once they saw it, they couldn't help but be impressed. The phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. This time it was Cassandra. "Madeline, I have news," she practically shouted into the phone. "Ryan and I are pregnant." "Oh my God, congratulations," I said. "How are you feeling?"
Exhausted and nauseous and completely happy, she said, laughing. "But I'm calling because we want to ask you something. We're planning a small announcement party for family, and we were wondering if you'd host it at Willowbrook Estate. Not as the venue owner, but as family. We'd love to celebrate at the place where we got married." "Of course," I said immediately. "I'd be honored." "And Madeline, we want you to just be our sister-in-law at this party. No coordination, no professional responsibilities. Sophie can handle any logistics. We just want you there as family." After we hung up, I realized this was what complete acceptance looked like. They weren't asking me to work their event or provide professional services. They were asking me to celebrate with them as family in the space that had become meaningful to all of us. Later that evening, Derek found me in our kitchen, smiling as I prepared dinner. "Good day?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "Really good day," I said. "Your cousin Emma wants to book the venue for her wedding, and Cassandra asked us to host their pregnancy announcement party." "As family or as vendors?" he asked with a grin. "Emma as clients, Cassandra as family," I said, and somehow that feels exactly right. Derek pulled me into his arms. "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" "I'm proud of you for fighting for your place in my family. Not just because it made things better for you, but because it made my family better people. They needed someone to call them out on their behavior." "Think they learned anything permanent?" I asked. "I think they learned that treating people with respect isn't optional.
Even when those people can't fight back, Derek said. And I think they learned that you can't take someone for granted just because they're family. As we stood in our kitchen, talking about our future and the family we'd fought to be truly part of, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. Standing up for yourself isn't just about winning individual battles, it's about establishing the foundation for all future relationships. The old version of our family dynamic had been built on me accepting whatever treatment they offered, grateful just to be included at all. The new version was built on mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and the understanding that family membership comes with both privileges and responsibilities. Would I go through all that conflict again? Honestly, yes, because the alternative, spending years being quietly resentful while accepting less than I deserved, would have poisoned my marriage and my relationship with Derek's family permanently. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is refuse to let them treat you badly. It forces them to either rise to a higher standard or reveal that they're not worth the effort. In my case, Derek's family chose to rise, and we all became better people for it. And now, as I plan Emma's wedding and prepare to celebrate Cassandra's pregnancy, I know that I'm not just the venue owner or the event coordinator, or even just Derek's wife. I'm family, completely and unconditionally, and that makes all the difference in the world. The woman who used to be excluded from family photos now has her picture on Patricia's mantle, right next to the rest of her children and grandchildren. The woman who used to be treated like hired help now gets consulted on family decisions and included in holiday traditions. Most importantly, the woman who once felt like she had to choose between her professional success and her family relationships now knows that demanding respect for both was the best decision she ever made. Because at the end of the day, you teach people how to treat you. And once you teach them well, the lesson tends to stick. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.